Go to BVA.org to find out how you can directly make a difference in the lives of the brave men and women who have given their eyesight in defense of our freedom. They fought for your independence, and by going to BVA.org, you can find out how to help these veterans regain theirs. Go to BVA.org today.
Discover the power of movement, connection, and community with the Adaptive Sports and Activities Interest Group. Join fellow veterans in peer-driven conversations focused on adaptive recreation, integrated support, and whole health rehabilitation, all designed to empower dignity, independence, and self-worth. Whether you're looking to get active or stay connected, this is your space to be inspired, supported, and seen. Visit bva.org for more information.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Visions of BVA, the official podcast of the Blinded Veterans Association. Today, we're speaking with someone whose life journey has crossed military aviation, leadership, mentorship, blindness rehabilitation, adaptive sports, and education. Lieutenant Colonel Brian O'Connell spent decades serving in the United States Air Force as a B-52 navigator and electronic warfare officer, before glaucoma gradually changed the course of his life. But instead of stepping away from service, Brian continued to find new ways to lead, mentor, and serve others, including returning to a classroom as a legally blind JROTC instructor to help save a program that meant a great deal to students and the surrounding community. As I prepared for today's conversation, I came across an excellent article written about Brian through Norwich University called Flying Blind: From B-52s to the Classroom. If you get a chance, I definitely encourage you to check it out. The article really helped frame and inspire many of the questions and topics we'll be discussing throughout today's episode. Brian, welcome to Visions of BVA. It's great to have you here. How are you doing today?
Hey, Steve. Thank you, man. It's great to be here. I'm doing well, and I hope you are too, man.
No, I really appreciate it, and I know our listeners will too. You originally wanted to become a pilot, but your vision redirected you into becoming a navigator and electronic warfare officer. Looking back now, do you ever feel like that early disappointment quietly prepared you for later challenges in life?
Yeah, that was one of those questions. As you and I were talking before we started recording, that really made me think. And that's a great question because in those days I was in college. I was a freshman, maybe a sophomore in college, Air Force ROTC. And what do you know when you're a freshman and a sophomore? I was in ROTC. I knew I was going to be in the Air Force. I wanted to fly because that sounded like the coolest thing to do. I didn't have an aviation background, so I wasn't like dead set on being a pilot because of some passion I had growing up. But it sounded awfully cool, and the instructors were pilots, and that just sounded like something I wanted to do. Well, my eyes, which seems to be a recurring theme in my life, my eyes got in the way, and I was nearsighted. And back in those days, the Air Force didn't allow anyone who was nearsighted to be a pilot. Depending on how much your nearsightedness was, you could be a navigator, and I did qualify for that. So I remember thinking that, okay, I can't be a pilot, so I'll be a navigator. I'll still fly. And there was some slight disappointment, but nothing significant. It just seemed like that was the hand I was dealt, and that's kind of the way I went forward with it. And little did I know that might have been one of the first times that I was dealt a hand that I didn't expect, and that would have caused, perhaps in this case, a very minor challenge, but in later years, a much bigger challenge. So yeah, maybe that was something that really did help prepare me for something later, some of the challenges later, without me even realizing that at the time.
I understand. It's funny, when I was thinking about serving in the military, I really wanted to be a pilot too. And I always had this feeling that oh, my parents, they're both wearing glasses. I'll have trouble seeing or something. So I chose not to go down that road for other reasons too. But it's kind of a, if you want to be a combat aviator, it can get in the way of that pursuit.
Yeah, being the Army guy that you are, uh, I wanted to be in the Army at first. I was dead set when I was in high school on enlisting and going airborne, and why not Ranger at the same time? In my 17-year-old brain, and then the Air Force offered me a scholarship, so I changed that pretty quickly, as you might expect.
Oh, the military offers great benefits and a
It does.
foundation for life.
Hmm.
What was it about flying in the B-52 environment that most people outside aviation would never fully understand?
Well, first, it's a combat aircraft. And being a combat aircraft, like all combat aircraft, it's not built for comfort. So when you get on as a passenger, you get on your plush 757 and fly across the ocean to go on your adventures. You're sitting pretty comfortably in that aircraft. The B-52 has ejection seats, and you wear a parachute on your back in that ejection seat. You wear a flight helmet with an oxygen mask, and it's very loud, very noisy, cold or hot, hardly anything in between. It's a very functional aircraft, and it's really good at what it does. But I think what most people will be surprised at, and what I was surprised at the first time I climbed up the ladder into the cockpit, was how cramped, small, and basic it is inside that aircraft. And it hasn't changed in the many, many years it's been flying. It hasn't changed a bit.
Thank you for that. That is interesting. I've been able to walk through the fuselage as a young kid because of my aunt served at Shepherd Air Force Base, and she taught hydraulic systems, and so it's kind of it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, it's a surprise. Now, when I say it hasn't changed, of course, the airplane's capabilities have changed over the years. It's much more capable. The avionics, the computers, the pieces and parts of the airplane have been upgraded significantly over the years. But the crew, um, as far as I know, the crew is still crammed into a very small cockpit, and there are not a lot of creature comforts inside that aircraft.
All right, next question. You spent years teaching and instructing in the Air Force before later becoming a classroom instructor again in civilian life. When did you first realize you enjoyed teaching and mentoring others?
I was thinking about that as well, and I became an instructor, an Air Force instructor, a classroom and simulator and flight instructor, when I had been about 8 years active duty. So I'd had 8 years of flying under my belt as a crew member, a B-52 crew member, and I'd been an instructor electronic warfare officer, but I hadn't had any classroom teaching experience at that point. I always thought I would enjoy that. I even toyed with becoming an education major when I was in college, way back, but I didn't. I was a history major. So I thought I would enjoy it. And when I became an instructor, a classroom instructor in the Air Force Electronic Warfare School for electronic warfare officers, um, I really, really enjoyed that. They train you very well. It was a 2 to 3 month instructor training school that we went through first to get certified and qualified to do that. And then when I started teaching in the classroom, and then we were also simulator instructors and eventually a flight instructor as well, I found that very enjoyable and I found it very fulfilling. Bringing in mostly in that case second lieutenants, fresh out of what we call nav school, so they just put on their wings as aerial navigators, walked across the base on Mather Air Force Base in Sacramento, California, to the electronic warfare school, and now we were going to teach them to become electronic warfare officers. So they were pretty sharp kids. They were all already flyers, already aviators, and they had something on the ball. So they made my job interesting and challenging. They asked great questions. They kept me on my toes, and I really enjoyed that back and forth and that environment in the classroom, in the simulator, which was an electronic warfare simulator that we trained them in, and in the airplane where we also did. I was a navigator instructor as well. in the aircraft, the T-43 Navigator training airplane. So I really enjoyed that, and thought that would be something I would like to do when I retired eventually, become a classroom instructor. I was thinking history, high school history teacher, something like that, which didn't turn out, but I think I came up with something better in the end. But I thought I was going to enjoy being a teacher, being an instructor for many years before I actually became that full time.
You describe glaucoma almost like background noise at first, something sitting quietly in the background of life. In what point did it stop being abstract and become real for you?
Yeah, it became real first in a more intellectual way when I was first diagnosed. I was diagnosed when I was still active duty during my retirement physical, and that's a good time to be diagnosed with things, as many of us in the military know. If you're going to find something, do it while you're still active duty. And so that was a shock. Where the heck did that come from? But it didn't affect me that I noticed. I had no noticeable effect on my eyesight. I was put on some medications, my drops, which I was on for many years, and super important to do that, to follow the protocol for that, which I did. So for about 15, 16 years, I had no real limitations that I was aware of. I suppose measuring would have found a few, and it probably did, but nothing that affected my day-to-day life significantly. Until one day in 2014, the pressure in my right eye spiked, and I didn't know it had spiked. I noticed my vision becoming foggy in that eye. Uh, one day, and then the next day it was foggier, and the next day it was even more foggy. And it took me about a week to realize I better call my ophthalmologist and ask her. And she said, "Get in here right now." And she performed a procedure on my eye, an emergency procedure on my eye to relieve the pressure. And then, I realized something's going on here. And a year later, the same thing happened to my left eye. But I knew better about getting in there quickly, which I did, but still had to have an emergency procedure. And from that point, 2014, 2015, my eyesight started decreasing significantly and continued to decrease, well, ever since from then to now. So 2014, 2015 was when it became very noticeable. I was still driving. Probably. I should not have been driving. I did for another few years. Had a couple of close calls until I finally, this knucklehead noggin of mine finally realized it's stupid, and I stopped. Fortunately, had no accidents, didn't hurt anybody or myself. But 2014, 2015 was the kind of the wake up call.
Brian, how many years at that point had you served up like 2014, 2015?
Well, I wasn't active duty at the time. I'd retired by then. So
Gotcha.
I was active duty until 1998 in my first for 22 years. Then I retired, and I worked in the defense contracting industry for about 4 years at that point, 4.5, 5 years. And then I was recalled after 9/11 voluntarily. The Air Force asked retired aviators, to come back. The Air Force found itself short of people, go figure, after the drawdown of the 1990s. And they needed aviators. So I came back in for 4 more years back on active duty. So I retired for the second time, as the Air Force called it, reverted to retirement in 2006. So I was retired finally from the Air Force in 2006. So 2014, 2015, I was teaching junior ROTC, in fact, when that happened.
I see. All right, we'll move on to this other question. You talked about giving up your driver's license in your early 60s. For many people, that represents much more than transportation. What did that transition feel like personally?
Yeah, that's huge, as anybody who's had to do that understands. And we've all heard stories of families trying to convince older relatives to finally do that because they're just not able to drive safely, and whatever the situation is. But for those of us who've lost our eyesight, we don't have that option to wait until we're in our 80s or 90s, or whenever that's supposed to happen. It's something that I don't think anybody can prepare for, until you're in the middle of it, and then you're in the middle of it. As I mentioned, I was driving longer than I should have been, and I mean that's the idiot in me, and I'm sure in other people. You don't want to give it up. But when I did, I almost hit the thing that made me give it up was I almost hit a guy standing in the road with an orange vest, stopping and directing traffic when they were doing the crew doing some tree trimming for a power line or a power company. And I almost hit him, and I realized, okay, that's really his time. So of course it changes everything. Fortunately, my wife has been wonderful about not only helping me get around, but volunteering. And I always try to not ask too much. I'm sure many of us can identify with that, but I have to ask. And if I don't ask, there's Uber, and there's rideshare, but it changes everything. You have to plan differently, as you know. You have to figure out transportation differently. So it's a major event, but at the same time, you're dealing with other things at the same time, right? I at that point, I wasn't able to read print on a page anymore, at least not without incredible magnification. So there's that's just a couple of things. Faces are no longer, or at that point, are no longer discernible to me because I'm not able. I have very little central vision. I'm not able to tell people who they are by their face. I have to listen to their voice, or sometimes by notice the way they walk or their height, or other mannerisms that identify them. So all this was happening simultaneously. The driving was part of it, but it was only a part of it. And then, if I thought about it too much, isolate that and start thinking about that, that can become a challenge to try to, where am I going to put that? But along with everything else, it's just all part of the transition. And I look back on that now and think, wow, that was a hell of a time, learning all that, figuring that stuff out, not doing really well at times, but trying to deal with that. That was a heck of a period in my life.
I understand. It is challenging to give up driving. My traumatic change forced me into not driving at all. But
Sure, yeah.
I definitely hear similar stories about giving up their ability, your ability to drive. And so, but I appreciate your honesty and what you shared. You mentioned that early on you didn't know other blind or visually impaired people. How isolating was that period before you found the blind veteran community?
Yeah, and I think that's the key for many of us. I didn't. I was in Florida. I was losing my eyesight, like I had mentioned, when I was still teaching. And I thought in 2015, going into 2016, well, I'm losing my eyesight. I'm not going to be able to teach anymore. I didn't know any different. So I retired. And we moved from North Carolina, where I was teaching, to Florida, where I'd been stationed we had lived a couple of times in Panhandle of Florida near Eglin Air Force Base in Niceville. And so I moved down there, it's a beautiful area. I love it down there. And I used to do a lot of sailing. I bought a sailboat like I had before, and I was sailing. I still had enough eyesight to be able to sail and get in and out of the marina and do that kind of thing. But I didn't know anybody else who was visually impaired. And without realizing it, I was becoming more and more isolated, socially isolated. And I know this is something many of us have gone through. Many of us have had to figure out. And I started avoiding going out and talking to people and just doing normal day-to-day things. I would sail, but I wouldn't even ask anybody to go with me because I thought, well, how do I tell them to do something when I'm not able to show them? And all this, I look back on it now, stupid stuff now, in my opinion, but wasn't stupid then because I didn't know. And so for 4 years, we lived there, and I had no idea that there was a VA, Blind Rehab Services. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about the Blind and Veterans Association. I had never been briefed on any of those things. And I didn't know anybody who knew that stuff until one day, and this was one of those things you can think about in a lot of different ways, but one day my wife was reading the local newspaper there, a letter to the editor from a veteran who had been to the Biloxi Blind Rehab Center. And he wrote a letter to the editor, Northwest Florida Daily News, extolling the virtues of the Biloxi Blind Rehab Center. And my wife was reading this and she said, "Have you ever heard of this?" And I said, "I've never heard of that." And in that letter, the guy put down the local VIST name in Pensacola and said, "Contact this guy if this seems like something you might be able to take advantage of." Until that moment, I never heard of it. So talk about serendipitous, and I went to I made that contact. I went to Biloxi in 2019 and everything changed from that letter to the editor. So people, support your local newspapers. they are wonderful things.
Most definitely. And that's why I'm proud and honored to have this opportunity to share stories like yours and help produce this show for the Blinded Veterans Association, because you never know how it might get to some family member or friend or stranger that runs into a blind veteran or even just a blind person in general, and helps them seek out assistance or training,
Yeah.
and change their life forever.
Are you passionate about guide dogs and the powerful ways they change lives? Join the Dog Handlers Interest Group, a welcoming space to celebrate, learn, and share experiences from the world of guide dogs. This group brings together handlers, trainers, dog lovers, and anyone curious about the transformative bond between people and their guide dogs. Whether you've worked with a guide dog for years or you're just starting your journey, there's a place for you here. Don't miss it. Connect, grow, and be inspired. The Dog Handlers Interest Group. Visit bva.org today for more info.
When you finally connected with other blind veterans through the VA and the BVA, what changed internally for you?
And that as we continue on with this story, that was the thing, going to Biloxi, being able to get into the system, finding out about it, being able to go to the Biloxi PRC and meeting other veterans. All of a sudden, as we all know who've experienced that, now we're with people who have experienced similar life changing events. All the different levels of vision loss and ages and experiences, of course, when you have a number of people in the same place. But right, you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And what do you do during breakfast, lunch, and dinner? You're talking to all these guys and gals, and you're learning about them and their experiences and the people they know and what they've done and what they've learned. And through them, you make contacts with other people. And that's how I found out about adaptive sports, by talking to other veterans who had engaged in adaptive sports. I didn't know there was such a thing as adaptive sports. And I can drop some names. Marlene Davis Lilly was the one that put me in contact with Lonnie Bedwell. And Marlene was there. Lonnie wasn't there. She said, "I know somebody you need to talk to." And the rest is history as far as getting me involved in adaptive sports, because Lonnie hooked me up. And from then on, I've met guys like you, Steve, and all the people that are able to take advantage of those adaptive sports programs in all the places that offer those, and some of the veterans camps at Steamboat and Crested Butte, your foundation there, Blind Endeavors. There are some just amazing programs out there that support veteran programs and adaptive sports programs. And so going to the Blind Rehab Center, finding out about it, was absolutely transformative.
Indeed. I think for many veterans, connection and community become a huge part of rebuilding confidence and rediscovering possibilities. You mentioned adaptive sports, reopening possibilities you thought were gone forever. Was there a specific moment where you suddenly realized, my life isn't over, it's just different now?
Yes, there was. There absolutely was. And I've talked about it before, but it was very powerful. And meeting you guys, and you're one of that first group of other veterans, blind veterans that I met at Steamboat. in 2020. Meeting you guys was absolutely, an incredibly major wake up call for me, and listening to your stories and finding out about you. But during that visit there at Steamboat, in I think it was early March, right before COVID, man, we snuck that in just barely before COVID, and we got home just in time. But the first day of skiing, I had skied a lot when I was younger and through college and different places. I was stationed in the Air Force when I was in a place where there was skiing. I skied a lot, taught my kids how to ski, and I was a decent skier, But I never thought about skiing after I lost my eyesight. I didn't think I couldn't. I just never thought about it. Period. It wasn't on my radar at all. And so I went up the hill the first time with my guide at Steamboat. Of course, it was a little bunny hill because I told him I haven't skied in many years and I don't know about this. And he said, "Well, okay, let's just try an easy slope and see what you're comfortable." And all the smart guide talk that he presented to me. And when I followed him down, I was able to look at his orange vest. I'm able to look up and use my lower peripheral vision to see a bright color like that. Able to look up above him and stay fairly close, within 20 or 25 yards. And skiing down that first little bunny hill, man, I tell you, it was pretty emotional to me. I didn't want to cry in front of people. We don't do that if we can help it. But I felt like crying. It was so powerful. And that's what I knew. That moment I knew, because my skiing still felt great. It's like riding a bike to me. That the skiing felt wonderful. But knowing that it was available and I could do that. And that moment, the rest of the world just opened back up to me. And it was absolutely powerful.
I know the feeling, and I even remember that event. I think I went to Hawaii on a random trip
You did.
right after that.
Can I tell that story real quick?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the Steve story here. So we'd finished up, and back then for some reason, we were flying in and out of Denver as opposed to Hayden. So we were in that van. We were on the van after the camp was over, driving down to Denver, hours. And, it seemed like, I don't know how many hours, 2 or 3 hours to go to Denver. And I was sitting next to you just because that's the way we were sitting. And I noticed, because I was able to see what you were doing a little bit, you're on your phone the whole time. I said, "Steve, what you doing?" You said, I'm booking a flight. And I said, "Oh, where are you going?" And you said, "Hawaii." I didn't know you very well then. We'd hung out and talked and done what we had done there at Steamboat. I said, "Hawaii, really?" And my next question was, "Do you know somebody there?" And you said, "No." I thought that was so cool, man. I tell you, I was like, "This dude is for real. This is so cool." And off you went to Hawaii.
It was a great trip. It was fun. It was beautiful weather. And just like you mentioned, it was right before COVID. And
Yeah.
Hawaii actually Honolulu was not as busy as it normally is. So it was a good time before we had to shut down and hunker down for a couple of years. But it was a great trip. And I'm glad the adaptive sports return, sports in general just returned to your life. And it's a wonderful feeling for me too. Adaptive sports and recreation really inspires me and motivates me and drives me to enjoy life even more.
Yeah, it is huge. And I'll tell you, even though we're joking about talking to you, and it was a funny moment. And again, I didn't know you very well, and I was still learning a lot of. I was traveling on my own, but it was the first time I had flown on my own as a blind person. And then you just go in Hawaii because you're going to Hawaii. That really resonated with me. I remember vividly thinking, "Hey, man, if Steve can do this, he didn't even know anybody there. He's going to figure it out when he gets there. As if Steve can do this, I can do this. We can all do this." And so, more than you realized at the time, that was a huge incentive. I was quite impressed.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah.
Sure.
I like pushing myself, and it is challenging. I won't lie to listeners and stuff. Like doing something like that requires you to understand certain technology and just be comfortable with your cane skills and socializing and talking to people and just doing good research and collecting information about wherever you're visiting. And but it is it is a great adventure to go somewhere in the world as a completely blind person where you don't know anybody. And I made a number of friends who I still speak to when I was there, and they showed me around when I was in Hawaii. And so, a tangent, but thank you, Brian, for your nice words. We'll move on to the next question.
Okay, yes.
You could have easily stayed retired, but instead you returned to teaching to help save that JRTC program. What made you say yes?
Well, it was a pretty easy yes, in fact, because by then, it was 2022. I'd been retired for 6 years by then, and I had been to the BRC, as we just talked about. I had met a lot of you people. I joined the BVA. I found out about the BVA, become a member of the BVA. I'd attended, I think at that point, one conference. And of course, there hadn't been any in-person conferences for a couple of years during COVID. So I had attended my first in-person conference, and that was in DC, which would have been in 2022. So I was really learning a lot about not only how to do things using technology and experience traveling and all the ways to live with, in my case, low vision. But I was also meeting a lot of really impressive people I really looked up to, who were doing very incredible things, in my opinion. So my sense of what I can do and what I could possibly do in the future was really heightened, and I felt like, okay, I feel comfortable doing a lot of things that I might not have predicted. So that's the lead up to I retired, and there was an instructor that came in and replaced me in 2016, and then he retired in 2022. He was on his way, and the way junior ROTC works, not like active duty, you don't get orders. If you're an instructor, you don't get orders to PCS to go to high school X and become a junior ROTC instructor. These are all either retired officers and NCOs or guard and reserve officers and NCOs now. They've changed that over the past couple of years, but it's all voluntary to do that. And in order to have a functioning program, you generally need two instructors. Some schools have more than that, but you generally have two instructors, an NCO and an officer, required to maintain the program, because there's a lot going on in that program. You do need two people to run it well, to run it effectively. So the instructor who replaced me retired, and no one applied to replace him. That's a little school in northwestern North Carolina where I was teaching, a beautiful little town, but it's, unless you're either from there or you just have a desire to live out in the country or something, it's not on most people's radar. And so no one applied to replace him, and the Air Force told the NCO, who I taught with for 8 years and who was a good friend of mine and is a good friend of mine. They told the NCO that, hey man, if no one applies to come in and be the second instructor, the Air Force was going to shut down the program. So the NCO and I, we stayed in contact, and he mentioned that to me. And in that same conversation, I told him, hey man, obviously I'm going to check with the wife, but if you're okay with the blind guy coming back, and if the school and the Air Force buys off on that, I know I can do that. And there are a couple of things that was, I wanted to come back and help. I wanted to help him because he was going to lose his job, and he's a good friend, like I said. And I obviously I didn't want that to happen, but I want also to help the program. The program at that school has been there for over 50 years. It's a large part of the community. It's been very popular. A lot of kids have gone through that program. Thousands of kids have gone through that program over the years. And it's an integral part of that school and the little town that school is in. And I didn't want to see that go away. So I worked through the process of applying to come back in, and both the school and the Air Force was very supportive. And it also worked out logistically, because even though we are living in Greenville, South Carolina now, my daughter lives in that town, Dobson, North Carolina. And in fact, my wife and I had bought her house as when she moved a couple of years prior to another house, and we just were going to maintain that for a place to stay and maybe Airbnb it. Well, I had a house now to go back to and have a daughter who's going to take care of me and help me out, and a grandson. So all of that, it almost fell into place. I couldn't have worked it out or planned it any better. So I went back first semester of 2023 in January and went back in the classroom.
Very cool. It's teaching is such a great thing. To this day, it's I love sitting down and learning new things. So I always kind of secretly wanted to be a teacher, and I do my own volunteering and stuff and help people who are blind and visually impaired, with technology and stuff remotely. But uh, it's a good thing, and I appreciate what you did, what you've done. You walked back into a classroom knowing that the students immediately understood that you couldn't see them. What was going through your mind in those first days back?
Yeah, that sounds like almost like what could possibly go wrong, right? Well, there are a couple of things that were working in my favor. First of all, I was very familiar with the school. It was the same school I had taught in previously for 8.5 years. So I knew the school, the classroom, the same classroom, little office we had as instructors, everything was exactly the same. So that obviously made things quite a bit easier for me. In fact, the instructor who replaced me, he didn't even change a thing. The desk was in the same place, the bookshelf was in the same place. I think most of the stuff in the desk drawers he hadn't even touched. So it was almost uncanny, kind of weird how little had changed, when I walked back in. Second, I knew the curriculum. I didn't need to learn new curriculum. I knew the curriculum very well. I had to brush up on it, obviously, update it a little bit. What I taught was aviation history and aerodynamics and astronomy and world cultures. I knew that stuff. I liked that stuff, and so I felt very comfortable brushing up on it and updating, like I mentioned. But I felt very comfortable learning the curriculum. The technology, I use Apple products now because, as you know, they're very accessible. I like them. They work for me. What we have and had in the classroom were Windows, Microsoft, Windows computers. I don't like them. I don't want to use them. So I had kids help me with the just getting them set up so I could put the PowerPoint up and talk to the PowerPoint. I know the PowerPoint slides, so I didn't need to see them. I knew what was on them. I talked to them. But no, not seeing the faces, I was upfront with the kids. They saw my cane every day. I didn't use it necessarily when I was up in front of the classroom because I know that area very well. But they saw my cane. I told them, I don't see your faces. So every single one of you is a good looking kid. Whether you are or not, you're a good looking kid. And they thought that was pretty funny. But they were actually very helpful, much more helpful than most people would have predicted. High school kids are brutally honest, but they're also very, very aware of what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. If you throw stupid stuff at them, they're going to wave the flag. If you work with them and ask them for their assistance, they will bend over backwards to help you, I found. And I always had a kid, or sometimes more than one, would want to come up to help me set up the technology for that particular classroom day. They knew I couldn't see faces, and I couldn't see if a kid's on his phone at his desk, which he's not supposed to be on his phone because he's supposed to be listening to the lesson or working through something. They with few exceptions, not everybody's perfect. There were a few knuckleheads in every class, but the kids were good. And I mentioned blind jokes in an article, blind jokes every day. They thought that was hilarious. And, I did not discourage that. It was just part of the dynamic in that classroom. And it was a great experience, Steve, I'll tell you. I missed it. I was ready to retire last year when I finished up, and we do have two very qualified, great guys who succeeded us. They replaced us as instructors. Both the NCO and I both retired last year at the same time. But I missed it because every day was just very enjoyable.
You've spent your life in leadership roles: officer, instructor, commander, mentor. Did becoming blind change the way you think about leadership?
I don't know. That's a great question, and I don't know if it changed the way I think about leadership. It certainly changed a little bit of how I had to lead, and I'm talking about in the junior ROTC instructor role here. When I was there the first stint, when I could see and do everything as a fully sighted person, I was much more structured academically, focused academically on, especially in an honors program that I had put together and run for the more academically talented kids. I was that teacher who had very strict guidelines on how to do research papers and put together presentations, put together all the stuff that a very involved research project requires. And man, I was tough on the ones who were in that program, because that was in my opinion, that was a great step for them to get ready for college, for those who wanted to go to college or were interested in that, and get them kind of focused on a freshman college level research paper, research project. And so I was leading through maybe academically making some of the academics pretty tough. I also ran a fitness program. Raiders is an Army or a junior ROTC and ROTC program, but the Air Force does it as well. So I like to run and do all that physical fitness stuff. So I coached that, and so I led through example there. I was in those younger days pretty fit and pretty agile and able to run better than most of the kids and do many of the Raider activities, at least as well as some of the more talented kids. So I like to lead by example, academically, lead by pushing them a bit and making them accomplish things that maybe they thought they could not accomplish. So that was the first 8.5 years of my teaching. And I thought I was pretty successful. The last 3 years when I went back, well, I wasn't able to visually demonstrate some of those skills, but I could encourage and discuss and show by example. Technology is better now than it was then. Guide them, lead them towards where to find information and how to do it properly through technology. So I had to change my style a little bit for sure, but it's doable. And I found myself just as successful. I was able to encourage, ratio wise, just as many kids to go on and do good things, in my opinion, as I was able to before. And so leadership, I felt comfortable. It just was I had to adapt a different style.
I understand. You've helped students realize opportunities they've never thought was possible. ROTC scholarships, college, leadership path. Did you see parts of your younger self in some of those students?
I did in some, yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I didn't realize that until maybe they had graduated and gone on. In one particular case, there was one kid who was so much like me in high school, it was almost uncanny. I never told him that, but he doesn't know it. But he was so much like me in my way of thinking, my attitude, my approach to just most things. It was almost uncanny. But yeah, what was cool about that, it's a lot of these kids, because it's a rural community, most of these kids' parents had not attended college. It's a Title I school, so it's an economically depressed area, and great families, great community, but just most had not gone to college, and so most of these kids were raised in a family that hadn't had that experience, and so if you're raised in a family where both parents have gone to college, you might find that encouragement, that information, and all those things that come along with that make it easier if the kid is interested in pursuing college. A lot of these kids just had never heard it, and a lot of teachers, I was a little disappointed. A lot of teachers, I was wondering why they weren't encouraging some of these bright kids, and they had not received some encouragement. So I found it very satisfying to work with kids who, when they heard about the opportunities, ROTC scholarships are a wonderful thing for those who qualify, and other scholarships and other, joining the military, as we all know. You get the GI Bill, you go in and you get those benefits, and then go to college later if that's what you want to do. There are a lot of paths for higher education, but many of them, even though maybe they'd heard it. It had not been really focused on them, so they didn't really believe that it was for them. And so it's very gratifying to know that there are a number of my students who were able to receive those ROTC scholarships. Many of them are still active duty. Several Air Force pilots. There's a Space Force officer out there, one of my former students. There's an Army officer, several enlisted Marines, and there's a sailor, several soldiers, a couple of airmen, just people doing wonderful, really cool things. And in addition, non-military. A lot of those graduates have gone on to do just really cool things in the civilian world as well. And so being able to help guide them and encourage them and maybe show them things, talk about opportunities they didn't think were available is really gratifying. And they're out there doing pretty cool things. And as we speak, 3 of my former students are right now at my alma mater, Norwich University, doing really good things up there. And I'm very proud of them.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Brian. One thing I really appreciate about your story is that it's not only about service or blindness, it's also about continuing to grow and to rediscover parts of yourself. I understand music is also a big part of your life and that you play trumpet. Has music changed for you emotionally or personally since vision loss?
I think so. Yeah. And it wasn't one of those moments, it was a gradual realization of that, I think, for me. I started playing the trumpet when I was a kid. I think I was 10 years old, and played all the way through college. Put it down after I graduated and entered active duty. It's pretty busy, in active duty, flying, and got married. We had a family and all that active duty and family stuff. I was pretty busy. So I put the trumpet down for about over 20 years. And when I retired the first time and was working in the defense industry, I thought, my kids were grown and they were gone, or just mostly gone, except for the youngest one. I thought, I really missed the trumpet. So I picked it back up and started playing. I was fully sighted and reading sheet music, and I joined a couple of bands, and I was doing some stuff. This was in Florida, and it was great. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And then when as I mentioned earlier, 2014, 2015, my eyesight really went south quickly. I was no longer able to read sheet music, or what we call charts. All of a sudden, it was kind of all of a sudden in that case, because I was in a band at the time. I was in a concert band, and we had a concert coming up. And I went and talked to the director, and I said, I thought I was able to read the music, and now I can't. So he suggested go to a copier and blow that stuff up, expand it huge. So I had these huge pieces of paper with this big print notes on it, the score of the music we were playing, which is incredibly unwieldy on the music stand. I thought, this is not a long-term solution. And so I kind of didn't think about that for a while, but I was still playing my horn. I was just sort of playing by ear, and I wasn't very good at it in those days. And then I realized, you know what? If you're going to keep playing, you better learn how to play by ear, because you're not reading music anymore, buddy. And I went back on active duty, and this was kind of a cool experience. Went back on active duty, and of course, the Air Force promised they weren't going to deploy me, but of course they deployed me. So I was deployed over to the desert, and I brought my trumpet with me, and I just brought my trumpet with me everywhere, like I still do. And went to the chapel, and they had a praise band in the chapel there, the deployed praise band. People from all over the military, deployed and joined in a praise band for Sunday service. And I learned how to play by ear, because I had to figure it out and to be in the right key. And I know I'm telling you things you understand, Steve. You have to be in the right key, and you have to, make sure that you listen to the other musicians and do something that makes sense. So it was a little painful. It made my brain hurt having to think about, how many flats and sharps and all that stuff is in this particular key, and how does that translate to my horn, and all those things that learning to play by ear requires. So I think I've become overall certainly a better musician, and I think a better trumpet player than I had been previously. I still play in a jam with other really good musicians here in Greenville. We have a jazz jam pretty much every Sunday. And as BVA people know, I generally play the national anthem for our convention. I enjoy performing. I really enjoy playing the horn, and it is a true friend. That trumpet is a true friend and a companion to me, and I really enjoy staying with it.
Very cool. Thank you again for sharing that. Music is a wonderful thing when you can't see. And if you can play it, it's that more. Such a good feeling, to interact with an instrument and make other people happy.
Yeah.
If you could speak to a veteran right now who's struggling with vision loss, identity changes, or uncertainty about the future, what would you want them to hear?
I think, and coincidentally, I am in regular contact with two veterans. I mean, obviously, we see a lot of veterans when we go places and do things, but I'm in regular phone contact with a couple of veterans. One is local here at Greenville. One is in Florida, who's the cousin of a friend of mine who asked me to call this guy. Both struggling. One's older than I am, which means he's pretty old. The other one is only in his 50s, and he is having recent vision loss and significant vision loss and struggling significantly. So I'm in phone contact with these guys, and the thing I have tried, I'm going to back up a little bit because we've all experienced our varying stages of adjustment. And we talked earlier in this interview here about, my 4-ish years of not knowing anybody else who was going through that experience and not understanding what the potential or possibilities were. These guys, that's where they are now. So I am trying to help them, and they're responsive, but they're tentative. And I'm not in person with them, and that makes it a little more difficult too. Try and help them understand that there are opportunities and tools and other people, organizations like the BVA, because they're both veterans, organizations like the VA and the Blind Rehab Services that neither of them were aware of. But they're tentative, like I mentioned, and kind of afraid to take that first step, which I absolutely understand. It can be terrifying to step out of what, at least if you're on your couch, at least you're on your couch. If somebody's taking care of, somebody's bringing you food and making sure you have subsistence, you're at least okay, right, in your mind. But as we know, that's not something I'd recommend that you go on and do the rest of your life. Step out of that place where you're somewhat comfortable, but probably pretty sad, and try something new and take a chance and, stepping out of your comfort zone and all those little cliches, but they're real. So I'm talking to these guys and encouraging, and we're in varying stages of where they are. So I think that's the main message to other veterans who don't yet know about the opportunities. All the people I met, you and the people at the BRC, Tracy Farrow, he knows, he's the guy in that crazy colored shirt who told me about BVA. If it hadn't been for Tracy, I wouldn't have heard about BVA when I was at the Blind Rehab Center. And all of the advantages of becoming a member and becoming involved. Those are the things that are so important. But the only way people are going to find out about them is if they step forward and take advantage of those opportunities. And that can be, like I mentioned, a very scary process. But that's the main thing I'd encourage veterans to do. Find someone to guide you, to assist you, to inform you, and then take those steps because they're incredibly important.
It's great advice. It is challenging, the transition, but everything you said, I can relate to, and all we can do is encourage other veterans, other people who are dealing with blindness, visual impairments, to get out there and meet others and do things. And hopefully when they socialize, and like you mentioned early in the interview, an epiphany or some sort of spark will happen, and it'll change their life, and they won't go on too long avoiding too many things that they might, really want to participate in or do.
That's the hope. Anyway, that's the hope. Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us today on Visions of BVA. I really appreciate your honesty, your service, your mentorship, and your willingness to share your journey with our listeners. Your story is a reminder that blindness may change the way we move through life, but it does not take away our ability to lead, mentor, serve, and continue finding purpose.
Well, Steve, it was my absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed talking with you, and it's always great talking with you, man. We always have a good time doing that.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you to everyone listening to this episode of Visions of BVA. If you're a blinded or visually impaired veteran looking for connection, resources, rehabilitation services, adaptive sports opportunities, advocacy, or community, we encourage you to visit the Blinded Veterans Association online at bva.org. You can also find Visions of BVA on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other major podcast platforms. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, sharing the podcast, and helping us continue bringing these conversations and stories to the blind and low vision veteran community. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Visions of BVA.
You're listening to a BVA production.
Curious about the latest tech and tools for independent living? Join us for the Vet Tech and Educational Series, your weekly destination for new technologies, innovative services, and essential life skills. These interactive webinars feature expert advice, product spotlights, and hands-on strategies to help you thrive. Discover what's possible. Empower your independence. Don't miss the Vet Tech and Educational Series. Visit bva.org today for more info. Innovation and independence at your fingertips.